So hi, good morning everyone. So thank you so much for the effort that you've put after the first module exam. So I think last Monday I already released the grade so that you have a rough parang idea in terms of like our performance after module 1. So one module down, parang two to go. So like what I've mentioned, parang more importantly, the next thing that we really have to focus on would be number one, parang hindi na kayo dapat magulat in terms of like the quizzes or the exams. Generally, the level of difficulty, the level of challenge will be the same. Pero I'm hoping na in terms of how we're gonna be strategizing about it is different kasi we've gone through two quizzes, one exam. So right now, you have a great idea na okay, it's really just a mix of two things. Number one is really making sure na we maximize theory in terms of just making sure na alam natin what we're talking about in the context. And then number two is just really familiarizing yourselves with the exercises and just having that clear mind in terms of tackling it. So we're done officially with accounting fundamentals. And like what I've mentioned, the good news about Module 2 and Module 3 is it's very topic centered. Yeah. So in terms of future quizzes, most likely if ever merong bonus quiz for Module 1, that will be after Module 2 and Module 3. We don't want to put another quiz now just because if you look at the calendar, our next exam will roughly be a month from now. So parang we want to really sprint for module 2. So for me, we really have to be strategic in such a way na November, yung 1 week ng November, I know that's parang a time and it's really important also to maximize the time with your family, also praying for those that, you know, have departed. Pero at the same time, bantayan lang natin yung momentum natin in terms of the SEM. So from now all the way to November 26, our mentality should be it's gonna be a sprint in terms of um our accounting module 2, right? So with that said,
Date ka kasama? Oven toaster?
we can officially begin with accounting for merchandising operations. So module 2, honestly, two topics lang yan. Two topics but really heavy topics. And for me, module 2 is probably gonna be the most difficult out of the three exams just because module 2 would be focusing sorry, kindly give me a moment. So sorry. So what I was saying is like module 2 will be difficult because it's more of a deep dive in a particular account. And inventory in cash have a lot of complexities. So the goal here is per topic, I'll tell you naman kung ano yung subtopic. Pero the goal here is per subtopic, be an expert at it so that makasagot kayo ng short problems for that particular subtopic. So with that said, module 2 is inventory in cash. So today we'll begin our inventory. Inventory is 4 sessions because it's really gonna be a deep dive into this very interesting topic. A lot of people they love inventory just because parang it's a very easy to imagine. And others naman parang na-overwhelm. But again, same strategy. If you're overwhelmed, let's just do the exercises and we take them one scenario at a time. So with that said, before we jump in terms of inventory, let's first talk about merchandising operations, right? So I don't know if you've noticed, but in terms of our lecture overview for the others, it's really more of like, ano ba yung mga business context? And then from there, let's start our journal entries. And then finally, let's talk about the impact in terms of financial statements. So basically, it's gonna be the same structure. It's gonna be the same framework for us in terms of inventory. And therefore, the very first thing is, let's start with theory. Now, why is it important to talk about a merchandising company? Because usually, merchandising company will have inventory. And why is that? So the very first thing is, what is a merchandising company? So if you haven't noticed, there are actually three different types of companies. You have a service company wherein they sell a service. So consulting, interior design, marketing, ano pa ba yung mga examples natin? Welding, these are all services, right? And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have manufacturing companies. So ito yung mga companies na they'll buy raw materials, they'll convert the raw materials into finished goods, and then they sell the finished good. So basically, parang for example, you think Apple. Apple is a manufacturing company because what they usually do is they get all the different parts, the chips, etc., etc. They turn it into iPhone and they sell you the finished good. So they manufacture the product. But right now, for inventory, our major focus would be merchandising company. So basically, what they do lang is they buy and sell. So for example, I don't know if you buy a lot of things in Lazada or Shopee, and you know na a lot of products from Shopee or Lazada, what they usually do is nag-dropship sila. They buy products in bulk from Alibaba, so sa China, or sometimes even Amazon, depending on kung sino yung network nila. And then they sell it here. They don't manufacture anything. All they do is they buy it and then they sell it as at a higher price. So in essence, that would be a key example of a merchandising company. So in module 1, puro service companies lang tayo. If you haven't noticed, sila Macy Consulting, sila Kevin Trin, si Buddy Consulting, yung interior designs, Hype Boy Studios, Fearless Ballet, all of those are a service entity. And basically, the reason why is because we didn't want to overwhelm you. Because service entities have the simplest operating cycle. Because wala silang inventory. Usually cash lang, usually prepaid expenses lang, and then they'll have your service revenue, and then you'll have your expenses. That's it. Yun lang yung attributed to service entities. So if we look at the operating cycle, what do we mean by operating cycle? So first key definition na I want you to be familiar with would be operating cycle. So operating cycle is just the time it takes for you to operate your business. So from the time you get your assets and then you convert those assets into something that's saleable like services or goods. And then finally, you sell those goods and services in step 3 to your customers. So either you sell it na you get cash in return or may accounts receivable kang na-accrue. And then finally, using the cash that you will eventually get, you get more of that asset, right? So an operating cycle is just usually the time it takes for you to operate your business. So looking at it from a service company perspective, let's go back to Kevin Trin. Kevin Trin is a service entity. And as a service entity, it has the simplest operating cycle. Wherein, step 1, they get assets in order to provide service. So imagine mo, ikaw si Kevin Trin, you invested cash to your business. How do you get your assets to run the business? Well, usually, you just hire your workers. So gagawa ka ng service. So either makakakuha ka ng cash when nag-weld ka or may accounts receivable. But eventually, within a short time, you'll turn into cash, right? So since nag-provide ka na ng service, makukuha si accounts receivable, and then finally, magiging siyang cash ulit. And then using that cash, you pay your workers, that will service more people, and then you'll earn in perpetuity. Kaya siya, operating cycle. On the other hand, what are merchandising companies? Like, how are they different? Well, merchandising companies, like what I mentioned, and this is another important definition that you should take note of, is that number one, they buy and sell goods na we call merchandise. So, in order to earn a profit. So, there are two types of merchandising companies. So, there are two. There are wholesalers that sell to retailers. So, anong ibig sabihin ng retailers? Retailers sell to the end consumer. So, basically, ang importante for merchandising company is that their primary source of revenue is sales revenue. So, unlike service entity, on one hand, you have service revenue. For merchandising company, the primary source of their revenue would be their sales revenue. So, there are two types. Yung wholesaler mo, so let's think someone, an OEM manufacturer in or let's say Toys R Us sells to other toy companies, right? So may OEM manufacturer ka, they sell to other businesses na called retailers, and then the retailers will send to you the end consumer, right? So si wholesaler, they sell to retailer. Si retailer, they sell to the consumer. But technically, no matter where they are in that path, what they do is they buy and they sell the goods in order to earn a profit. So now, let's look at the operating cycle of a merchandising company. So step one, they get, so they have cash. And the very first thing that you do as a retailer is you purchase your inventory. And again, going back to the definition of inventory, it's basically something that you want to sell. So you use the cash to buy goods from your wholesaler. Step one, you purchase your inventory. So pag may inventory ka na nakuha, step two is magde-delivery of goods. Meaning you receive the goods as your inventory. So so retailer ako, bibili ako ng inventory and then i-deliver ni wholesaler yung goods and yung inventory sa akin. So from my cash, nagkaroon ako ng another asset which is inventory. And then third step is I will sell the inventory. So I can sell it na directly makakakuha ako ng cash, or as you know, pwede rin naman na may utang sa akin, so accounts receivable. Right? And then finally, you receive the cash. Kasi regardless kung accounts receivable siya or cash, eventually that accounts receivable, I'll be able to turn into cash. And then may cash na naman ako, so I'll buy inventory again so that it will be delivered again to me. More inventory, I sell more, I get cash, I buy more inventory until perpetuity, right? So that is the operating cycle. So with that said, the important thing here is that in merchandising company, you don't really need to convert anything into finished goods. What you buy is already the finished product. So in comparison, you have your merchandising company versus your service company. What are our key insights? Number one, your merchandising company has a longer operating cycle. If you can see, mas mahaba yung process, mas maraming steps. Versus a service company na mabilis lang. Like, mag-service ka lang, may pera ka na, paikot-ikot. Number two key insight is that we have a special asset under merchandising company, and that is inventory. So how do you classify inventory? It will be classified as a current asset. Inventory is a current asset. So may magtatanong, bakit current asset ang inventory? Because you have this expectation na bumibili ka ng goods because you'll be able to sell it in the short term. Kaya siya current assets. So with that, let's just summarize. Let's differentiate merchandising company and service company. So in terms of theory, wag tayong malito. Merchandising company has a longer cycle compared to the shorter cycle of a service company. Number two, ano ang primary source of revenue ng merchandising company? that would be sales revenue. So basically, they buy and sell inventory, kaya sales revenue, versus a service company na service revenue, right? So rendering the service. And then in terms of how they categorize expenses, sa service company, wala tayong special category. Lahat ng expenses naka-bulk, right? So sales revenue, total expenses, lahat yon, yung expenses na yon, tawag lang natin doon, operating expense. But for a merchandising company, there are two major categories of expenses. You have your operating expenses, and you have this thing called cost of goods sold. So right now, it looks weird, but I'll talk about cost of goods sold in the later slides. But ang importante remember is, in merchandising company, which will be the focus of our inventory part, so a big bulk of our you have to classify your expenses into two. One, which how much is your cost of goods sold, which is basically expenses that are related to your inventory, and what are the other operating expenses, right? But later, we'll have an appreciation. Ang importante lang is right now, you understand the major differences. And this is super important when it comes to theory. So, make sure na you're a master para hindi kayo malito. So, first, we know lang na operating cycle of a merchandising company is longer, and it's from purchase of inventory to delivery of goods all the way to the sale of inventory, and then finally you receive cash, right? So, lastly, may magtatanong lang sa akin is, ano naman difference ng manufacturing company? So, tapusin na lang natin lahat. But again, the focus is merchandising company. So, sa manufacturing, what you do is you buy raw materials. So, for me, I super like using the analogy of overcooked ba yun? Like, it's a Switch game. You make pizza or parang Diner Dash, parang those types of games. So, think about it na you're a pizza company. Technically, you can argue that the pizza company is like a manufacturing company. You get the raw materials, meaning your ingredients, your cheese, your dough, your tomato. And then from there, you have those delivered to you. So, meron ka na. And then, syempre, paano mo gagawing pizza? Yung ingredients mo. You convert those raw materials into saleable goods. So, while you're cooking, ang tawag doon is work in progress. What it just means is that it's currently in production. And then finally, it will be a finished good. It's a saleable good. It's a pizza. And then, you can sell the pizza as inventory to a customer. So either the customer will pay you in cash or may accounts receivable ka. But eventually, the accounts receivable will turn into cash. And using that cash, you'll buy your ingredients as raw materials. And then you have your work in progress, meaning niluluto siya or it's in production, so that you arrive with your finished good, which is the pizza. And then the pizza is your inventory that you can sell to the customer. That will give you the money and then repeat the purpose again. So ano lang difference ng merchandising company sa manufacturing company? They both sell inventory, but the difference is the manufacturing company converts assets from raw materials to work in progress to finished goods. So yun lang yung difference ng merchandising company to a manufacturing company. So now, dapat you have an appreciation already. May service company, may manufacturing company that has raw materials, work in progress, and finished goods. But ultimately, the focus of our inventory lessons would be a merchandising company, wherein we buy a finished good and we sell a finished good. So, any questions in terms of the definitions? Doon lang muna tayo sa definitions. Kindly thumbs up if everything's okay so that we can proceed. Feel free to DM me kung may questions. Yeah. Okay. So, good pa so far, right? So, again, first part, theory portion. Second part, let's now talk about the inventory system. So, for me, I'm gonna be taking my time in terms of explaining this. Hindi ko siya mamadaliin para pwede niyo siyang balikan. But I'm telling you now, medyo information overload siya. So, please flag me kung merong hindi clear. Hindi, wag niyong palampasin na hindi siya clear per part, right? So, let's start. So, there is the 4 building blocks of an inventory system. Number 1, we need to understand what the formal definition of inventory is. Right? Kasi yun yung pag-uusapan natin for the 4 sessions. Number 2 is that we have to learn a new kind of income statement called comprehensive income statement. Then number 3, I need you to understand cost flows for inventory. And then finally, number 4, we're gonna differentiate between 2 inventory systems, perpetual versus periodic. Right. So with that said, let's first jump into the formal definition of inventory. So this is my request for everyone. For each of the accounts that we'll talk about, cash, inventory, accounts receivable, etc., please memorize or at least familiarize yourself in the formal definitions. So inventory, ito yung formal definition. So inventory are assets that are, number 1, held for sale in the ordinary course of business. So this particular definition refers to your finished goods. So toys, any product that are already finished, pizza, those are held for sale in the ordinary course of business. So that's one definition. Another is in the process of production for such sale. So that's the work in process account. And finally, the last one is in the form of materials or supplies to be consumed in the production, in the process or in the rendering of services. So technically, in terms of the formal definition of inventory, it talks about held for sale, which is basically finished goods, work in process, basically those that are in the process of production, and in the forms of materials or supplies to be consumed, or raw materials. So again, think about it in terms of the overcooked analogy. Your raw materials are your cheese, your dough, your tomato. Those that are work in process or in progress is those that are being cooked by the chef. And yung finished goods nyo are the pizza. So your total inventory will be comprised of your total raw materials plus your total work in progress plus your total finished goods. So if I ask you, how much is your inventory as a pizza company given the following information? You have, let's say, $10 worth of dough, and then $10 worth of cheese, and $10 of tomato. You have $50 worth of pizza being baked in the oven, and then you have $100 worth of pizza that are finished. Basically, naging siyang Hawaiian already, let's say. So, what is your total inventory for that company? Well, number 1, my total raw materials would be $30 because that would be the $10 from the cheese, the dough, and the tomato. So, $30 yung raw materials ko. $50 yung work in progress ko in terms of like the pizza that's currently being baked in the oven. And then I have $100 as finished goods of like number of Hawaiian pizzas, right? So now, my total RM is 30, my work in progress is 50, and my finished goods is 100. Adding all those 3 together, my total inventory would be $180. So, in future questions, pag tinanong sa inyo, what's total RM? You just look, say 30. What's total WIP? Work in progress, 50. What's total finished goods? 100. But what's total inventory? 30 plus 50 plus 100 is your total inventory. All your raw materials, all your work in progress, and all your finished goods are part of your inventory account as basis to your formal definition. So, but don't worry, I just mentioned that because para lang hindi kayo malito. We're tackling the simplest form of inventory right now. merchandise, right? So basically, wala tayong production. Lahat finished goods. We just buy and sell a product. So for example, since super popular now, think about it as napansin mo like, oh, Taylor Swift is super popular. Everyone's just looking for Era's ticket. So maybe I should sell Era's merch, right? So basically, you don't produce anything. You'll probably just buy the merch somewhere that's cheap, and they'll sell it in like a FB Marketplace or in Shopee at a higher price. So merchandising lang. Buy and sell of finished goods. Wala tayong production, right? So basically, the merchandising company, ang ginagawa lang naman niya is they buy from a wholesaler and then they sell to the customer, right? So we're done with the formal definition of inventory. Are there any questions or clear pa naman so far? Kindly thumbs up kung medyo gets pa naman. Okay. So with that, the next step is may kakaibang portion or may kakaibang way to write an income statement for a merchandising company called comprehensive income statement. So let's go to the comprehensive income statement. So the reason why kakaiba sa merchandising company is it because of this one major difference between a service company and a merchandising company. A merchandising company categorizes two types of expenses. Again, a merchandising company categorizes two types of expenses. So, ano yung two major categories natin? Our two major categories are your cost of goods sold or COGS and your operating expenses or OPEX. So, in the exam or in the quizzes, please write it out na buo, like cost of goods sold and operating expenses. But for exercises or for discussion purposes, let's just say COGS or OPEX. Pero dapat buo sa exam. So, let's start from the beginning. Ano ang net income natin or net loss? It starts with your revenue minus your expenses is equal to your income, gross profit or net loss, right? So, okay tayo sa sales revenue. Sales revenue is total revenue for merchandises sold during the period. So, sales revenue is like service revenue, pero your revenue comes from sales. Easy to understand. Expenses, on the other hand, is a bit more difficult because there are two ways, there are two major categories. Your cost of goods sold is the total cost of the merchandise sold during the period, while your operating expenses talk about expenses incurred in the process of earning sales revenue. So think sales salaries or insurance expenses. So cost of goods sold is the total cost related dun sa merchandise na binenta nyo. Whereas operating expenses has nothing to do with inventory. Operating expenses is sales ng mga employees nyo, insurance expense, and basically, the gross profit, so this is a new term, gross profit is just sales revenue, not minus total expenses. No, it's sales revenue minus cost of goods sold. So first equation na gusto kong tandaan nyo, if assets is equal to liabilities or plus equity is your bread and butter and module 1, for inventory, your bread and butter would be gross profit or gross profit is equal to your sales revenue minus cost of goods sold. And then meron pang iba na mangyayari kay operating expenses. So, to understand this, we go back to the Geely car problem, right? Before, we said that there's a matching principle na to make the car, you spent 800,000 pesos. Since hindi mo pa siya nabenta, you categorize this as an inventory. And then, wala ka pang revenue. But once nabenta mo na siya, this 1.2 million is your sales revenue. And this kind of expense, what should you categorize this as? Should this be cost of goods sold or operating expenses? Kindly comment in the chat what you think. Yung 800,000. Yung 800,000 is your total cost to build the merchandise that is the car. is this cost of goods sold, the expense of 800,000, or is this operating expenses? Yeah, feel free to message the chat. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Or DM na lang. Okay. So, maraming pero the conflicting the answer is it's a cost of goods sold. So again, going back to the definition, tatanungin nyo lang, ano ba yung binenta ko? Car. So, my sales revenue of selling the car, how much yung ginastos ko to get that car? If it's the answer is 800,000, then that's the cost of goods sold. Pero kuwari, may salary ako na 200,000 dun sa nagbenta, yung sales agent. Yung 200,000 na yun is not a cost of the good na I sold. It's something else. It's my operating expense. So ang test lang ng cost of goods sold is, ano ba yung binenta mo? Yung pizza. Ano ba yung binenta mo? Car. Ano ba yung binenta mo? T-shirt. Ang tatanungin mo lang, magkano yung cost mo in buying a t-shirt, a car, or a pizza? And that would be your cost of goods sold. So now, the next question is, what's your gross profit? The gross profit is just 1.2 million sales revenue less cost of goods sold, which is basically the cost of the car. So ang gross profit natin would be 400,000. Are there any questions or clear pa naman so far? Kindly thumbs up na lang if clear pa. Okay. Sige. So with that, we move on. So now let's derive our comprehensive income. So don't worry, I know medyo new pa yung concept. So let's talk about it in terms of an equation format. So right now, ang nangyayari is that we're coming in from revenue minus expense is equal to net income or net loss. Alam niyo yan. Module 1. Now, with the merchandising company, yung expenses natin here, binabasag natin. There are two major types. Revenue minus your cost of goods sold, which is related to your inventory, minus your operating expenses, is still equal to your net income or net loss. So from expense, binasag lang natin to two major categories. And then finally, ano yung last equation na we learned? Revenue minus COGS is your gross profit. So our gross profit minus operating expenses is equal to your net income or net loss. So ganun lang. Step 1, binasag natin yung expense to COGS and OPEX, pero revenue minus COGS minus OPEX is still equal to net income. Revenue minus COGS is equal to gross profit. So another way of looking at it is gross profit minus operating expenses is equal to your net income or net loss. And from there, we have derived our comprehensive income statement. Na in table format, this is what it should look like. Sales revenue minus cost of goods sold will give you your gross profit minus your operating expenses will finally give you your net income and your net loss. So if you notice, ang difference lang is sales minus expenses is equal to net income. Pinaartihan lang natin. We broke down expenses to COGS and OPEX and nilagyan lang natin ng gross profit in between. So now, let's apply. So Kelsey Inc. is a retailer that sells Taylor Swift eras merchandise. So ito yung facts. You sold 240 eras merch for 120,000. And then they incurred the following expenses. They spent 90,000 to buy the eras merch that they sold and 10,000 as a salary of the sales clerk. So automatically, ang kailangan yung gawin is let's categorize the expenses. Right? So that we can get our comprehensive income statement. So how would that look like? So first is identify sales revenue. So sales revenue is just total revenue earned. So again, be careful. 240 yung merch na binenta niya. But 120,000 is the total revenue. So our sales revenue would therefore be 120,000. Next, what would be our cost of goods sold? Would it be the 90,000 eras merch and the 10,000 salary of the sales clerk? Or is it the 10,000 lang? Or is it the 90,000? So step 2 is that let's identify our cost of goods sold. So again, paano mo malalaman yung cost of goods sold? You go back. Ano yung binenta natin? Yung Era's merch. So yung merch, how much was the merch bought? 90,000. Therefore, our cost of goods sold is just 90,000. And therefore, automatic. If you know the revenues, you know your cost of goods sold. Your gross profit is just 120 minus 90. That would be a gross profit of 30,000. And then finally, what's the remaining expense? The operating expenses. And that would be the salary of the sales clerk of 10,000. So you will have a net income of 20,000. So basically, ito lang yung important distinctions and the important classifications for our comprehensive income statement. So this is one of the major equations that you have to know. Sales revenue minus cost of goods sold is equal to your gross profit. Gross profit minus operating expense is net income and net loss. Hindi ko na kailangan sabihin sa inyo what you can expect in terms of exercises, in terms of quizzes. May mawawalang isa dyan. Sasabihin nila, if the gross profit is 30,000 and your sales revenue is 120,000, what's your cost of goods sold? 90,000. Pag sinabi na lang, your sales revenue is 120,000, your gross profit is 30,000, and your net income is 20,000, paano yung operating expenses? Well, honestly, panggulo lang yung sales revenue. Ang kailangan mo lang is the 30,000 and the net income of 20,000 to get 10,000 operating expenses. So, again, in terms of like Sudoku types of questions, please make sure alam nyo yung how to manipulate this equation to derive the missing, right? So, solve for the missing x. So, again, the important equation is sales revenue minus cost of goods sold is equal to gross profit. Gross profit minus operating expenses is equal to net income. So, basically, ang sinasabi lang naman ito is that we're matching. We're matching the cost of goods sold or how much the merch was of 90,000 and the income that we derive from the sale, which is 120,000. So, basically, the matching principle is upheld. So, we're done with formal definition of inventory and comprehensive income statement. Are there any questions for so kindly let me know lang in the comments kung meron. So we're done with the comprehensive income statement. So wag magulo, yun lang yung important for the second part. Now the third part is where I really need you to understand this. Meaning, magugulo kasi kayo sa inventory. As in, parang expect the problems to be super weird kasi there are purchases, there will be different kinds of sales. But whenever you're panicking sa inventory, I just want you to know na you're just tracking two things in inventory. The quantity of the products and the cost of those products. Again, the quantity yung importante, ilan yung inventory mo, ilang pieces of pizza, ilang pieces of clothing, ilang pieces of merch, and magkano. Like how much are those total products? So quantity and cost. And for you to understand, let's talk about the super important thing would be cost flow. Ano ba yung flow of your inventory in the different stages of from purchase to sale? So let's say you're a company and you're at the second year of your operations. So at the second year of your operations, meaning meron ka ng merchandise from year 1. So at January 1, 2023, at the second year of your operations, you will most likely have a beginning inventory. So coming in from the Kelsey Inc., let's say you're selling your merch for 1,000 pesos each. So yung total number of units mo in the start is 15. Your cost is therefore 1,000 times the 15 items, 15,000. That's the cost, how much you bought the merch. Hindi ito yung selling price, right? So 1,000 cost niya per item. You have quantity 15 at the start of the year. 15,000 is the total cost of your inventory at January 1. So syempre, you're noticing na grabe sobrang adjet ng mga tao, parang they're flying out to Singapore, they're availing Klook enterprises. I'm sure I'll be able to sell more than 15. So on January 5, let's say, you started buying. You ordered an additional 85. So now, ilan yung total quantity natin? So yung purchases, how much would that be? The quantity is 85, so 1,000 pesos each. So 85,000 yung purchases. So now, if you add your beginning inventory and if you add your purchases, you will get what you call your cost of goods available for sale. Ang sinasabi lang niya dito is, ilan ba yung total na kaya mong ibenta? Ilan ba yung total na kaya mong ibenta? So cost of goods available for sale is just how much or how many goods can you sell? And the answer would be whatever I have in the beginning plus my additional purchases. So pag tinanong sa inyo, what is the cost of goods available for sale for this company? The answer would be two things. Ilan and how much? Quantity and the cost. My cost of goods available for sale in terms of quantity would be 100. 15 beginning inventory units plus 85 purchases units is equal to 100 units of your cost of goods available for sale. And therefore, kung alam mo naman that the unit price is 1,000, 100 times 1,000 would be the cost, which is 100,000. Still the same na 15,000 beginning inventory plus purchases of 85,000 is equal to your cost of goods available for sale. So, ito yung total number of merchandises mo, 100. At January 5, you have 100 merchandise. And then there are only two things that can happen for things that you can sell. Either nabenta mo or hindi. So, cost of goods available for sale is your total piece of the pie. And that's the source niya is your inventory and your purchases. And then now that you have the total piece of the pie, what will happen to that pie at the end of the period? There are only two scenarios. A portion of that will be sold, successfully nabenta mo, or a portion of that hindi mo nabenta. And therefore, it will become an ending inventory. So the two things that will happen sa cost of goods available for sale, a portion of that will be turned into cost of goods sold or expenses kasi nabenta mo na. A portion of that will remain as an asset as your ending inventory. So either it's sold, so naging cost of goods sold. So let's say out of the 100, 80 of those will be sold. And then therefore, yung not sold is 20. And therefore, your cost of goods sold would be 80,000 and your ending inventory would be 20,000. Kasi yung 20 yung hindi mo nabenta, so asset pa rin siya. Yung 80 na nabenta mo, you have to apply the matching principle and therefore magiging cost of goods sold siya. So, kapag nawawala kayo, you always go back to your cost of goods available for sale because that's the whole piece of your pie. It will tell you two things. The cost of your goods available for sale or COGAS will be your beginning inventory plus your purchases and or your cost of goods sold plus your ending inventory because that's the piece of the pie. Beginning inventory and purchases make up your cost of goods sold and then eventually a portion of it will be sold kaya naging cost of goods sold and then a portion of it will be ending inventory. I notice that the people that really do well in inventory are those that can really understand this concept. Na, number one, inventory is just a question of two things. Quantity of the items and the cost of the items. Number two, in order not to get overwhelmed by the numerous purchases and sales, you need to take note of your cost of goods available for sale And then eventually, you understand na cost of goods available for sale is the total number of items na pwede mong ibenta. Like, can you sell 120 merch? No, definitely not. Kasi 100 lang yung meron ka. And out of those 100, 80 yung na-sell. So, 100 yung total ko, 80 yung nabenta ko. Therefore, the remaining is 20. So, ending inventory. So, understanding that in the cost of goods available for sale, a portion will be sold. Kaya siya naging expense. A portion will be kept as ending inventory. Kaya siya asset. So, before I proceed, may questions or clear naman so far yung cost flow. Kindly thumbs up kung clear. Take note of the units and the cost as an example. Balikan nyo para lang it has to make sense, right? And then, every inventory problem, try to map out ano ba yung COGAS, ano ba yung COGS, ano ba yung ending inventory. It just has to click paulit-ulit kasi dito kayo hindi mawawala, right? So please understand the cost flow, right? So next would be we have then therefore have to differentiate between two inventory systems. So all of the things I discussed, the formal definition of inventory, the comprehensive income statement, and the cost flows are all gonna be applied whenever we talk about inventory. But now, may two different inventory systems na magkakaroon ng subtle differences. So ano tip ko dito? Like the primary and the alternative method for accruals and deferrals, be an expert first in one system and then just know the differences with the other system. So there are two systems. You have your perpetual and your periodic. And from here, sasabihin ko na sa inyo, master perpetual first. Master perpetual first. Be an expert at perpetual. Huwag niyo muna titingnan si periodic. Let's take our time. Master perpetual inventory system first. And then learn periodic in terms of, okay, ito yung perpetual ko, ano ba difference niya kay periodic? Okay? But the important thing to know right now is that there are two inventory systems. Your perpetual inventory system and your periodic inventory system. So what's the difference? The difference is your perpetual records your cost of goods sold each time a sale occurs, right? Sorry, parang I got notified na my internet's medyo weak. So do let me know in the chat kung laggy. But basically, perpetual, the cost of goods sold is recorded each time a sale occurs versus periodic na cost of goods sold is only determined at the end. So the major differentiator between perpetual and periodic is kailan mo ba nire-record yung cost of goods sold? If it's every time a sale occurs, it's perpetual. If it's only at the end, like one time, big time, cost of goods sold determined at the end, it's periodic, right? So you have your perpetual and your periodic. So ano yung mga formal definitions? So for perpetual, it's just basically, it keeps a detailed record of the cost of each inventory for every point of purchase and sale. It perpetually updates. And the reason why is because perpetual provides better control, but super expensive nito. And therefore, applicable siya for high unit values. Like, pare, nagbebenta ka ng furniture, ng appliance. So, you want better control kasi pag may nawalang isa, sobrang laki ng mawawala sa'yo. So, perpetual are usually used for high unit values like furnitures, appliances, etc. Perpetual are for companies that want better control pero ang trade-off is mahal siya. Therefore, yung alternative is your periodic na okay, it's only updated at the end of the period. So find it unnecessary or uneconomical to invest in perpetual system. So ayun nila ng mga, so one of my clients kasi is like point of sale, so yung mga utak POS, etc. na merong iba naman na wag na natin bilangin every time nagbebenta. Like mag-tabulate na lang tayo at the end. So, for me, in order to differentiate the two, how I really think about it is think, um, think perpetual is think buying from an Apple store. Every time, kinascan nila yung phone, and then they'll have a barcode, etc., etc. Every time may sale, perpetually nag-update yung status of their inventory. Versus, back when my mom was young, parang nag-run sila ng mga bakery or parang ng sari-sari store. And basically, parang kinukuha lang nila yung pera as people buy. And then at the end of the month, doon lang sila may isang day na binibilang nila inventory nila. Just to check, tama ba yung number na binenta natin? And then ano ba yung mga kulang? So perpetual is very perpetually updates versus periodic, every month lang sila. Kasi hindi siya economical. Why would I spend so much money kung maliit lang naman yung inventory ko? So net-net, perpetual, cost of goods sold is determined each time a sale occurs. Periodic, cost of goods sold is only determined at the end. So with that, there are 9 concepts in inventory, in accounting for inventory, na regardless kung perpetual ka or periodic, you have to know. Pero, since 9 concepts siya, I know nakakatakot. So, let's break it down further into 3. There are 3 major events that will happen in the lifespan of any inventory company, regardless kung perpetual or periodic siya. May purchase ka of inventory, may sale ka of those inventory, and may end of period adjustments ka in the form of adjusting entries and closing entries. So, right now, our goal is dapat familiar tayo with the 9 concepts. First, at the lens of perpetual. And then, sa periodic, I know walang time most likely now. I will upload a companion video for periodic. Pero ang importante is that you understand the overall process of inventory. Because even though perpetual ka or periodic, you will always go through the same operating cycle. Purchase, sale, end of period adjustments. And then you have 9. So may 9 sets of journal entries kayo na i-memorize and more for perpetual. May 9 different sets of journal entries kayo na i-memorize for periodic. So memorize pa lang yon. And analysis. Kailangan yung i-analyze rin each and every important concept. Right? So now, but before that, let's just look at the differences of perpetual and periodic in the lens of the 3 major phases. When you buy inventory, when you sell inventory, and your end of period. So another way to differentiate it is, perpetual is like SM. Nagbibenta sila sa Lazada. Versus an Instagram shop na nagbibenta ng thrift clothes, let's say. So, sa SM, they're probably keeping track sobrang daming updating their inventory all the time, perpetually, every hour, every second, every sale. Sa IG shop, kung nagbebenta ka lang ng clothes, you probably count your clothes at the end of every week or at every month, right? So at the end of the period. So let's just say, when you purchase the inventory, pareho lang sila. You record the purchase of inventory as a journal entry, right? Pareho. No difference between perpetual and periodic. When you sell the inventory, this is where the first difference comes in. Sa perpetual inventory, they will already compute and record the cost of goods sold each time a sale occurs. Sa perpetual yon. Pero sa periodic, ang i-record lang nila is yung sales revenue. So sa perpetual, dalawa yung journal entry nila when they sell. A journal entry to record the sale, and then a journal entry to record the cost of goods sold. On the other hand, sa periodic, isa lang yung journal entry nila. Sales revenue lang. Because at the end of the period, yun naman yung difference. Sa perpetual, they will have no more entries. Pero sa periodic, that's the only time, they compute and record their cost of goods sold as a journal entry. So that is the major difference of perpetual and periodic. Again, perpetual inventory system perpetually updates their inventory, and therefore they record cost of goods sold every time your inventory is sold. But periodic, only once a month or once every period. So periodic records and computes cost of goods sold at the end of the period. So, ito lang yung tatandaan. So, cost of goods sold, each time a sale occurs, that's perpetual. Cost of goods sold, only determined at the end. Sorry. Nag-lag raw. Saan part nag-lag? Ano yung kailangan kong ulitin? Sorry. Or clear naman. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for flagging. Okay. Sige. So, basically, for perpetual, so, ito. Sasabihin ko na to now. Sa long problem, hindi isa-spoon feed sa inyo most likely kung perpetual or periodic. Or pwede rin naman. Pero please, determine first, what is the inventory system used? Is it perpetual or periodic? Because I see sometimes na isang long problem, some people would see computed for perpetual, pero periodic pala yung inventory system. So, all 10 points wala, or all 10 items wala. So, important, don't take it for granted na you have to know the difference between perpetual and periodic. This is more than a theory question. This will affect your exercises. So, please know the difference between perpetual and periodic. So now that we understand perpetual and periodic, we're done with the building blocks. We can now focus on journal entries. Start muna tayo with perpetual and just to see the whole cycle, and then balikan natin again with when it comes to periodic. Before that, are there any questions or clear pa naman so far? Kindly thumbs up kung nakakasunod pa. And then we can proceed. Okay, sige. So now, those kung mahilig kayo sa journal entries, this is the time na puro journal entries na lang yung pag-usapan natin, right? And in order to do that, let's first focus on accounting under perpetual inventory system. So, always think barcode kapag perpetual inventory system kasi every time a sale occurs, nag-update yung inventory. So, again, regardless kung perpetual or periodic, they will go through 9 concepts. 4 under purchase, 3 under sale, and then 2 under end of period. Pero para madaling isipin, let's look at the comprehensive case study na Toys R Us. So, Toys R Us is looking to sell Minion toys given the popularity of the movie during 2022. So, ano yung steps mo? So, first concept, syempre, operating cycle, you will buy inventory. So, first concept, purchase of inventory. So, for this point on, please start, bring a notebook out and then write down with me. So, ito talaga, parang I need your active participation para hindi kayo mawala. Right? So, for purchases, basically, you buy merchandise to sell to consumers. So, pag bumili ka, you'll have a debit in terms of inventory. Ano yung credit mo? The question lang is, binili mo ba siya by cash or inutang mo siya? So, the credit is either cash or accounts payable. So, when do you record purchase of merchandise? Normally, when the goods are received from the seller. So, it's supported by a purchase invoice. So, basically, this is just a sample of the merchant purchase invoice. So, please write it down with me now. Concept number 1, purchase of inventory. There are 2 journal entries lang sa purchase. Binili mo ba siya on cash or binili mo ba siya on credit? Journal entry 1.A is pag bumili ka ng inventory on credit. So, debit inventory, credit accounts payable. Journal entry 1.b is kumbinin mo siya in cash. So, 2 scenarios. Debit inventory, credit cash. So, let's apply. Toys R Us purchases for the wholesaler Yuan Kong Plush Toys Co. or YK Plush Toys Co. 100 million plushies for 72,500. The terms are 210 and 30 FOB shipping point, 10-day return. So, later, wag muna tayong matakot. So, as you can see, there are 9 circles here. We're in the first circle pa lang, which is purchase of inventory. So, later, pag-usapan natin to, pero let's ignore this for now. Ang importante lang is, they bought inventory for 72,500. Now, ang gusto kong first question nyo, whenever you read an inventory question problem is, how did they buy it? Scenario 1 is they purchase it on credit. So the journal entry, and please write it down with me, is debit inventory, credit accounts payable, 72,500. Tumaas yung inventory mo because you have assets na you can sell, pero tumaas yung liability mo in terms of the accounts payable because you haven't paid for it yet. On the other hand, scenario 2 is, or scenario B is, you purchased it directly by cash. So the difference lang is debit inventory, credit cash of 72,500. So we're done with the first concept. Clear pa naman so far. Kindly thumbs up kung clear, nakakasabay. Yun. So first batch. Write it down with me, please. Next is a very difficult concept to understand. Pero for me, at the start, i-memorize nyo muna. And then, eventually, understand. Freight cost. So, bumili ka pa lang. Let's say, YK is from Alibaba or from China. So, from China, isi-ship niya to the Philippines. Now, you have to look at the terms. The sales agreement will indicate who will pay for the freight. So, freight means, sino yung magbabayad dun sa ship? Sino yung magbabayad dun sa truck? There are 2 terms. FOB shipping point and FOB destination point. FOB just means free on board. So, FOB shipping point, what it says is that the buyer, si Toys R Us, yung magpipay ng freight cost. Pag FOB destination point, it's the seller or si YK Plush Toys nagbabayad ng freight cost. And there's a major implication on how to account for that. So, under FOB shipping point, so for me, it's shipping point BP, so buyer pays, FOB destination point, SP, seller pays, right? So for me, it's SPBP and then parang DPSP, DPS, right? So SPB or DPS. So shipping point, buyer pays, destination point, seller pays. So sa shipping point, the goods are free on board on the carrier, and then sa destination point, it's free on board on the buyer's business. But ang importante lang is, FOB shipping point, si buyer yung magbabayad, si Toys R Us. And therefore, I will record the journal entry. Kasi ako yung nagbayad ng delivery fee eh. Pero, as a buyer sa Toys R Us, if it's shipping point, wala naman akong ginastos. So, no journal entry. Ang kailangan mag-journal entry is si YK Plush Toys. Yung journal entry ng seller, so please take this note, is debit freight out, which is an expense, credit cash. So, again, FOB shipping point, so SPB, buyer pays. Since si buyer, tayo si buyer, we will record a journal entry. On the other hand, DPS, destination point, seller pays, walang journal entry si Toys R Us as a buyer, ang may journal entry is si seller. So usually one per point of view lang tayo and we're from the buyer's perspective right now, right? So take note lang na the debit for the seller is freight out, expense, credit, cash. So this is a better illustration. Sa FOB shipping point, the buyer pays for the freight. So kailan nata-transfer yung ownership? Kapag before passes to the buyer dito, before siya ma-ship. So FOB shipping point, si buyer, si Toys R Us yung magpipay, kailan niya nakuha yung ownership of the Minion toys? Nung binord yung toys sa Chinese port, sa China. So hindi pa siya nag-travel ng sea. Doon sa pagka-board, doon nag-transfer yung ownership. Versus sa destination point, yung ownership ni buyer, since hindi siya yung nagbayad ng freight, yung ownership magpapass lang pag na-receive niya na sa Philippines yung toys. Right? So, the idea lang here is that right now, ang pakilang natin is it shipping point, destination point? If it's FOB shipping point or SPB, shipping point, buyer pays, the buyer will record a journal entry. And logically, since may ginastos ka, is that an expense or is that a part of your inventory? What the accounting system or standard says is that the freight is considered part of purchasing the inventory. Why? Because importante na binayaran mo siya para makarating. So technically, if I paid 100 pesos for a Minion and ang shipping cost niya is 50 pesos, my inventory should not be 100 pesos. It should be 150 because for me to be able to get it and be able to sell it, I spent 100 on purchasing it and 50 to have it delivered. So 150 yung cost ko to get that inventory and then sell it. Like, think of it practically. You have a 100 peso toy. Nagbayad ka ng 50 pesos for it to get here. Will you sell it at 120 pesos? May kita ka ba doon? No. You have to take into account na 50 yung ginastos ko rin. Therefore, ang journal entry when it comes to freight and delivery is debit inventory. So, tumaas yung inventory because tumaas yung cost of you trying to get it from point A, which is from the supplier, to point B, to where you can sell it. And then, credit cash kasi you have to pay. Hindi na lang i-deliver kung hindi ka nagbayad. So, in summary, concept number 2, kindly take note, you just have to differentiate. Is it shipping point? If it's shipping point, buyer pays. Destination point, seller pays. Right? So, kapag shipping point, we write the journal entry, debit inventory, tataas si inventory, credit cash, kasi nagbayad ka ng cash. And then, on the other hand, pag destination point, wala kang journal entry. Pero kindly take note na si seller yung mag-journal entry. So let's apply. On July, scenario 2A, the term was FOB shipping point. And then scenario B, destination point. Pero yung freight cost is 5,250. So we're in concept number 2. So FOB shipping point, so shipping point, SPB, shipping point, buyer pays. So therefore, my journal entry is debit inventory kasi tumaas yung cost for me to get the inventory. Credit cash of 5,250 kasi binayaran ko yung deliverer. On the other hand, pag destination point, wala akong journal entry. Pero please take note na si YK, yung plush toy, they'll create a journal entry na freight out, which is an expense, 5,250. Credit cash, 5,250. Any questions sa FOB shipping point, FOB destination point? Kindly thumbs up if clear pa naman so far. Okay. Ayan, may question. So the question is, nakahiwalay po ba lagi yung journal entry ng freight as inventory? No. So if you're referring to journal 2.A, dadagdag lang siya sa inventory. Pero take note lang na freight siya. Right? So inventory 5,250. So coming in from the other problem, other journal entry, which is journal entry number 1, if 72,500 yung inventory ko right now, after journal entry 2 of 5,250, 72,500 plus 5,250 is equal to 77,750. So, at the point na nag-shipping point, my total inventory is 77,750. So, hindi siya nakahiwalay. Pero dumagdag lang yung inventory because of the freight. Okay. So, next scenario for purchases. Let's say na tanggap mo na. So, you have 77,750 worth of inventory. Now, chine-check mo yung mga plush toys. And then, makikita mo na some can be damaged or defective, some are inferior quality, or some are not in accord with the purchase specification. So, sabi mo, gusto ko minion na yellow pero binigay sa'yo minion na blue. Of course, magagalit ka. Of course, gusto mong i-return or gusto mong magkaroon ng allowance. So, now we have this concept na purchase return, purchase allowance. And it applies to damaged or defective goods, goods that are inferior in quality, or goods that are not in accordance with the purchase specifications. So may two remedies ka. One, literally, ibabalik mo sa kanya. Like, kuwari, out of the 100, ayaw mo na 80. Like yung 20 parang blue. I-return mo sa kanya. Physically. That is a purchase return. On the other hand, a purchase allowance is, sasabihin ni seller, okay, admittedly, pangit yung 20 out of those. So, wag mo na i-return. Keep the merchandise. Babawasan ko na lang yung kailangan mong bayaran sa akin. Commensurate to the number of defective goods. So, ang only difference lang is, purchase return means you return the goods physically. Purchase allowance says, wait, wag mo na ibalik sa akin physically. Bibigyan na lang kita ng discount or deduction or allowance from the purchase price. So, for this, ang mangyayari lang is, bababa yung total inventory natin. Why? Because our total cost in order to, for that whole number of inventory, bababa. Kasi binigyan tayo ng discount. So, if before, let's say you spent 72,500, sasabihin nila, hindi, sige, mag-wave na kami. Parang, bababaan natin to. So, therefore, inventory will go down. If inventory goes down, that would be credit inventory. Now, yung utang mo, bababa rin. So, debit, accounts payable. So, for any purchase returns and allowance, the journal entry would be debit, accounts payable, credit inventory. And then, yun. So, debit, accounts payable, credit inventory. So, let's go back to the scenario. So, we're done with purchase. We're done with freight. The next concept, so write this down, is purchase, return, and allowance. So, upon the inspection of the 1,100 plushies, nakita mo na hindi minion yung binigay sa'yo. Ang binigay sa'yo si B1 and si B2. So, I don't know kung naabutan nyo pa to or kapanahunan nyo pa to. But, basically, iba yung plushie toy. So, it's not up to your specification. So, you wanted to return it, pero, sabi nila, okay, wag mo na i-physical return. Sobrang hassle na ibabalik mo pa to China. Bibigyan na lang kita ng 7,250 worth in allowance. So, your journal entry here would be debit, accounts payable, bumaba yung utang natin, bababa rin yung inventory natin of 7,250. So, that is journal entry number 3. And then finally, the last concept under purchases is discount. So, The last term na lang naman na hindi natin alam. So, alam na natin FOB shipping point or destination point. Alam na natin ano mangyayari pag may ni-return ka or may allowance. Ano yung mga weird 210 and 30? So, 210 and 30 means you get a 2% discount if you pay within 10 days. And then the normal, regardless of kung may discount or wala, you really have to pay me within 30 days. So 210 and 30 means if you pay within 10 days, you get a 2% discount. And then, pero regardless, you have to pay me within 30 days. So bakit ini-incentivize ni supplier? Kasi, and I'll be honest with you, for inventory, usually accounts payable yan, palagi. Rare na cash. It's usually accounts payable. And then on the other hand, si supplier, to incentivize you to pay your utang, they will tell you, if you pay within 10 days, bibigyan kita ng discount. Kasi gusto nila magkaroon ng cash. Versus pag 30 days or more, parang mahirapan sila to be liquid. So basically, purchase discounts incentivize prompt payment. So they're included in the terms. So other terms is 110 EOM. So 1% discount if paid within 10 days of next month. So please take note also of this. So there are two things lang naman from a buyer's perspective. Either yung discount, tinake mo, or hindi mo tinake. So pag hindi mo tinake yung discount, you pay the full cost. If you take the discount, then the discount is based on the invoice cost less returns and allowance. So it still decreases the inventory because the discount reduces the cost of inventory purchased. So let's look at it from an example's perspective. So generally, write this down. Concept number 4, 2 scenarios. You take the discount. So it's gonna be a simple journal entry of debit accounts payable, meaning nawala na yung buong accounts payable mo, yung utang mo, credit cash, kasi binayaran mo na. And then ito, pag nag-discount taken ka, it's a compound journal entry na, yes, you will de-recognize the whole liability na debit accounts payable, pero may 2 components ka. Yung credit mong cash, hindi na total whole amount of the accounts payable kasi meron kang reduction of inventory, which is the value of the discount. So please take note of these journal entries, right? So with that, let's have an example. So ang credit terms is 210 and 30. And you bought it, I think, July 11. Now, the rule is ignore first day, count last day. So if July 11, you start with 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. 21, pag nagbayad ka ng July 21, you will get a 2% discount. Pero 22 onwards, that's when you pay the full amount. So scenario A is July 22 ka nagbayad, so you take the discount. Scenario B, July 20 ka nagbayad, so within 10 days. So punta muna tayo sa madali. Toys R Us paid its credit after 10 days. So wala kang discount na nakuha. Therefore, how do you solve? Invoice of 72,500 less your purchase returns and allowance of 7,250. That is your 65,250. Therefore, yung journal entry mo here is debit accounts payable 65,250, credit cash of 65,250. And by journal entry 4, zero na yung utang mo in relation to that first purchase. Wala ka nang babayaran. Nabayaran mo na fully. On the other hand, 4B, you take the discount kasi July 20, so within 10 days. So how do you solve for the discount? Number 1 mistake is that people don't know where to multiply the discount. Do you multiply the discount at 72,500? No. You multiply the discount on the balance of your invoice less your purchase return and allowance. So here, it's gonna be invoice of 72,500 minus 7,250. Your current balance is 65,250. This 65,250 is where you multiply the 2%. So 65,250 times 2% is equal to 1,305. So now you have a debit accounts payable, which is basically still the 65,250. Credit inventory of 1,305, that's the value of the discount. And then the remaining, which we squeeze so that magbabalance yung debits and credits natin, is 63,545, which is just basically 65,250 minus the discount. So yun lang yung kailangan nating bayaran. So at this point, apat na yung journal entries natin. Debit inventory, credit accounts payable 72,500, and then you have your shipping point, your purchase returns and allowance, and then your purchase discount. Now, what is the total cost of your inventory? So normal balance is debit. So you have a purchase at 72,500. Credit yung 7,250 of purchase return, 1,305 of purchase discount, and then debit of 5,250 of rate. So now it's 69,195. Any question on purchases or everything is clear so far? So please memorize the T accounts also. The purchases and freight increase your inventory. Purchases, returns, and discounts decrease your inventory. So credit side siya. And then eventually, your inventory will be 69,195. So basically, tapusin na lang natin yung last. So we're done with 4. Let's do the last 5 concepts. So sales transaction. So basically revenue recognition. So earned when goods are transferred from seller to buyer. So there are 2 journal entries under perpetual inventory system every time you sell. There's a journal entry to recognize revenue, and there's a journal entry to recognize cost of goods sold. So ang magiging ano niya is debit AR, credit sales revenue, and then may matching kang recognize the revenue, debit COGS, credit inventory. The only difference or another scenario is pag nagbenta ka and then on cash or on credit. So 1 point A is credit, so accounts receivable. 1 point B is in cash. So same debit cash, credit sales revenue, and then to match COGS palaging debit COGS, cost of goods sold, minus credit inventory. So for this, meron ka na nung 69,150 worth of purchases. Right? Now, nagbenta ka. You sold 75,000. So selling price yon. Yung related cost is 38,450. So scenario 1, nagbenta ka on credit. Meaning, hindi ka pa nakatanggap ng cash. So what you will do is record 2 journal entries. Debit accounts receivable, credit sales revenue of 75,000. Tumaas yung kailangan mong i-receive. Tumaas yung sales revenue mo. And then, you have to matching principle. So debit cost of goods sold, 38,450 kasi yun yung cost of the plushies you sold. Credit inventory, 38,450. So bumaba yung inventory, you finally recognized it as an expense. Scenario B is pareho lang yung journal entry, iba lang yung name. Cash lang, nabenta mo in cash. So debit cash, credit sales revenue of 75,000, and then you still have to match the COGS. So debit cost of goods sold, credit inventory of 38,450. So we're done with the first concept under sales. Sale. Siyempre, pag nagbenta ka, in the same way, baka mayroong mga customers na hindi happy about what they received. So, what will happen is either they will return the goods, like physically return it, or you have to give an allowance. So, sales allowance. So, dalawa rin yung journal entry na you have to do. You have to reduce the revenue recognized. So, babawiin mo. And then, babawasan mo yung accounts receivable na you have to get. So now, may credit ka ng accounts receivable, and then you have this new account called debit sales returns and allowance, which is basically a contra revenue account. So to sale. So ano ang normal balance ng sale? It's a credit. Revenue is a credit. So if it's a contra revenue account, sales returns and allowance or SRA, ang normal balance niya is a debit. So for now, i-memorize nyo lang na you have to reduce the revenue recognized. Pero rather than debiting sales revenue, we're gonna introduce a contra revenue account called sales return and allowance. And then babawasan rin natin si accounts receivable with a credit of accounts receivable. Sa cost of goods sold, babalik rin mo lang. Debit inventory, credit cost of goods sold. Because, nire-reduce mo rin yung related expense. So, ito lang yung journal entry. Debit sales returns and allowance, credit accounts receivable to reduce the revenue recognized, and then you will also reduce the cost of goods recognized. So, let's see. As an example, para mas madali nyo ma-imagine. Some unsatisfied customers wanted to return the products. So, 7,500 yung sales price worth yung sinolit nila. Kasi rather than namin yun, ito yung natanggap nila. So, kailangan mong i-reduce yung revenue na na-recognize mo. And yung kailangan mo. Kasi hindi ka hindi ka nila babayaran ng 7,500. Right? So, ano yung kailangan mong gawin? Step 1, let's reduce the revenue recognized. So, alam na natin to. Yung credit is accounts receivable 7,500. Because we know that because it's defective, they're not gonna pay for it. So, bababa yung accounts receivable natin. And then, normally, what you'd expect is, dapat bumaba rin yung sales revenue natin kasi hindi na natin siya technically nabenta. But, just to make, sa sobrang importante to keep track of sales returns, rather than using debit sales revenue, we debit it using a contra revenue account called sales returns and allowance 7,500. So, yun. Something to take note. And then, of course, sa matching expenses mo, you have to put it back. So, debit inventory, 3,845, and then babawasan mo yung expense recognized. Kasi, kapag nag-de-recognize ka ng revenue, magdi-de-recognize ka rin ng expense. So, aside from this, so as you can see, nagbe-mirror lang. So, may purchase returns allowance, may sales returns allowance. May purchase discount, may sales discount. So, ito naman from the perspective of the seller. So, kapag yung customer mo nagbayad na hindi nagtitake ng discount, what you'll just receive is debit cash, credit, accounts receivable. Meaning, nakuha mo na yung utang nila sa'yo. Pero, pag yung discount tinake nila, mawawala na yung accounts receivable in total, pero yung cash na makukuha mo is slightly lower kasi may sales discount ka. And again, we will introduce another contra revenue account in the form of sales discount. So again, ang normal balance of a sales discount is a debit. So just take note lang of the name. So sales discount. So basically, meron tayong client that paid after 4 days, and then may client tayo that paid within 4 days. So, the one that paid after 4 days, with 10, 4, and 30, so how do we interpret this term? You will get a discount of 10% if you pay within the 4 days upon selling. Regardless, you have to pay me within 30 days. So, if you sold it at July 22, you ignore the first day, count the last day, so 23, 24, 25, 26. Sorry, I think 21 niya binenta. So, 21 niya binenta. So, 22, 23, 24, 25. So, 4 days. So, July 26 niya, binayaran. So, after 4 days, wala siyang discount. So, ano na lang yung total accounts receivable natin? The invoice price of 7,500 less the sales returns allowance of 7,500. It will give you 67,500. So, it's now debit cash of 67,500, credit accounts receivable 67,500. And then, scenario B is paano kung may discount silang tinake? So now, again, you apply the discount on the balance, not on the invoice price, but on the balance. So the balance is 67,500 times the 10% discount. So that's 6,750. So same, you derecognize the accounts receivable. So credit AR, kasi makakatanggap ka naman na ng pera, pero not the total 67,500. A portion of that will be discounted. Specifically, it's 6,750. So you have a debit sales discount of 6,750 and then debit cash. So ang actual money lang na matatanggap mo is 60,750. The rest will go to sales discount, which is a contra revenue account. So in the end, these are your journal entries for the 3 concepts under sales. And then, ang sinasabi ko lang is that technically, para madali yung buhay, we should have debited sales revenue. Pero, super importante for management to know, ilan ba yung na-return? Ilan ba yung na-discount? Because, they want to know kung mabilis ba magbayad yung mga tao in terms of their sales discount. Sobrang pangit ba yung products natin na sobrang laki ng allowance natin? So, that's why, rather than just have one entry of sales revenue, they decided to introduce 2 contra revenue accounts. So sales return allowance has a normal debit balance and sales discount has a normal debit balance. Pero kapag tinanong sa inyo, how much is net sales? The answer would be sales revenue credit of 75,000 minus the sales return and allowance of 7,500 minus the sales discount of 6,750, it will give you 60,750. So basically, the last na would be, we're done with selling, we're done with purchasing, we're done with selling, we're done with 6 out of the 9, 7 out of the 9. So the last 2 concepts na lang would be at the end of the period. So regardless, kung perpetual inventory system yan, sometimes, knock on wood, may mga inventory ka or mga minions na mawawala or baka manakaw, baka may nasunog. So, at the end of the period, we always do a physical count. So, after the selling, meron ka namang rough record of how much inventory is currently in the in your accounting records. Pero to be sure na accurate yon, you do a physical count. So, ito yung question. Sino yung mas accurate? The accounting record or the physical count? The physical count is more accurate than your accounting records. Again, the physical count is more accurate. Therefore, if the physical count is higher, we have to increase the inventory. So, debit inventory, credit cost of goods sold. Meaning, we increase our inventory, so tumaas yung asset natin, and then bababaan natin yung expense na na-relate dun. Pag the physical count is lower, we have to decrease our inventory to the physical count, so we have to recognize it as an expense. So, for physical count is higher, basically, debit inventory, credit COGS. Pag decrease inventory, if the physical count is lower, debit COGS, credit inventory. So, at the end of the period, the company conducted a physical count. So, according to our inventory, our perpetual record is 34,590. So, based on our record, it's 34,590. Pero, nag-physical count ka. So, yung physical count mo says 35,000. So, sino mas accurate? The record or the physical count? the physical count is more accurate. Therefore, we have to increase inventory to 35,000. So ano yung difference? 35,000 minus 34,590 is debit inventory of 410. So kailangan natin pataasin si debit. And therefore, ano yung corresponding credit? Corresponding credit is cost of goods sold. Because kung tumaas yung inventory mo, dapat bumaba yung related expense. So 410. On the other hand, nag-count ka, scenario B, so a different scenario. The physical count is 30,000 lang pala. So sino yung mas accurate? The record or the count? The one that's more accurate is the physical count. So now, kailangan natin pababain sa inventory to 30,000. So now that would be credit inventory of 4,590. And now we have to recognize a cost of goods sold kasi tumaas yung expense natin in relation to the inventory. So that would be debit 4,590. So basically, that's journal entry 8. And then concept number 9 is closing entries. Ano lang yung sasabihin ko sa closing entries? Sa closing entries, I will just warn you already, pareho lang si journal entry 3, so yung net income and net loss, and si owner's drawings. Magugulat lang kayo na meron lang na bago kay closing the revenue account and closing the expense account. So, meron sa exams na, okay, I respect naman na yung strategy nila, hindi nila memorize yung closing entry. But for module 2, you have to be experts at closing entries. So, ano lang yung kailangan special for inventory? Yung sales return and allowance and sales discounts, you need to expect na they will be credit when you close out your service revenue. So, debit service revenue, credit sales SRA and SD, sales discount, and then yung kung ano yung matira doon, that's your income summary. That's how you zero out your revenues. For income summary, just expect na you'll have a cost of goods sold. Yun lang naman. So here, if going back to the example, the service revenue was 7,500. Pero with our SRA of 7,500 and the sales discount of 6,750, our income summary therefore is 60,750 credit versus our income summary na debit for closing out expense is comprised of our cost of goods sold and our operating expenses of 1,055. So you have a debit of 35,750. So sino mas malaki? The debit of the 35,000 or the credit of 60,000? Of course, the credit of the 60,000. Therefore, we have a net income of 25,000. So the debit is income summary of 25,000, credit owner's capital of 25,000. So apologies for extending a bit, pero I just wanted to end this particular learning session na pinasadahan ko yung 9 concepts. Purchase, freight, PRA, PD for purchases. Sales, SRA, SD for sales. Adjusting entries, closing entries. For perpetual, yun yung mga journal entries. For periodic, I'll upload another video. So I'll discuss it tonight. Periodic. I want you to redo the Toys R Us and then tell me specifically ano yung mga journal entries na hindi nagme-make sense sa inyo para pwede natin pag-usapan ulit. So do the Toys R Us, perpetual muna. And then periodic, let's talk about it, or I will leave it up to you as homework to watch me again discuss ano yung difference for periodic. Thank you so much. Apologies for the ones that may class pero may recording naman. So I'll upload this na lang after the end. Yeah. So I think I'll officially end the recording here.